Alpha King Draven Ashworth had been raised on one simple rule. Aluna was not chosen by chance. She was chosen by strength, by bloodline, and by the way she made a room fall silent when she walked into it. His father had said it to him 100 times before he died, and Draven had never once questioned it. So when the moon goddess's bond snapped into place on the night of the Alliance gathering, joining him to a quiet servant girl named Wren Calloway, instead of the noble-born she-wolf his council had spent months preparing him to accept, something in his chest turned cold. The Great Hall had gone silent that night, but not the way his father used to describe it. It was the silence of shock. Hundreds of wolves from allied packs stood watching as the bond pulled Draven across the room, past the polished nobles and the seated alphas, straight to a girl in a plain gray dress who was refilling water cups along the back wall. She looked as surprised as everyone else. Her hands trembled around the pitcher she was holding, and for one heartbeat, something like hope flickered across her face. Draven crushed it without a second thought. He looked at her the way a king looks at an inconvenience, not a person. Then, in front of the entire gathering, he said the words that would follow her for the rest of her life. He rejected her. He said the bond was a mistake, that a servant could not stand beside a king, and that he would instead honor the arrangement his council had already prepared with Seraphina Vane, daughter of a powerful neighboring alpha. The room exhaled in relief. Alliances mattered more than fate, they said. A king had to think of his kingdom first. Wren did not cry in front of them. She did not argue or beg for a kindness she had never expected to receive in the first place. She simply set the pitcher down, folded her hands, and walked out of the hall with her back straight, even though the rejection had torn something loose inside her that would take a long time to heal. She had grown up an orphan in the pack, passed between distant relatives who tolerated her more than they loved her. She had never imagined a mate bond would choose her at all, let alone a king. When it happened, and when it was thrown away so quickly, she promised herself one thing: she would not let the pack see her break. In the weeks that followed, Wren returned to the life she had always known. She scrubbed the floors of the war hall before sunrise. She fed and brushed the hunting hounds in the kennels behind the training grounds. She carried water to the Omega quarters, where the weakest and most overlooked members of the pack lived. Wolves who could not shift easily or fight well. Wolves the rest of the pack mostly forgot existed. Nobody asked how she felt about the rejection. Nobody thought to. She became, in the eyes of most of the pack, a footnote to the king's story, rather than a person with one of her own. But something in her had changed, even if no one noticed it yet. She began paying closer attention to the Omega quarters, not because anyone told her to, but because she recognized something of herself in the wolves who lived there. They were overlooked the way she had always been overlooked. She started staying later in the evenings, listening to their small complaints, learning their names, remembering which pups liked to be sung to, and which elders needed extra blankets when the nights turned cold. Nobody rewarded her for this. She did it anyway. Meanwhile, preparations for the alliance marriage between Draven and Seraphina moved forward at a steady pace. Seraphina was beautiful, sharp-tongued, and certain of her place in the world. She walked through the packlands as though she already owned them, correcting servants, rearranging furniture in the king's private study, and speaking to the council with a confidence that impressed Draven even when it unsettled him. He told himself this was what Aluna should look like. He told himself the goddess had simply made an error that fate would soon correct. The first sign that something was deeply wrong came almost 3 months after the rejection. A young pup in the Omega quarters collapsed during morning training, feverish and shaking, unable to explain what was happening to his own body. Within a week, 4 more Omegas had fallen ill with the same symptoms. The pack healers examined them, tested them, and came up with nothing. The sickness did not behave like any known wolf ailment. It weakened the body slowly, dimmed the eyes, and left its victims too exhausted to shift at all. Panic spread through the pack faster than the illness itself. Some whispered that it was a curse tied to the broken mate bond, punishment from the moon goddess for Draven's public rejection. Others feared an attack from a rival pack, a slow poison meant to weaken Ashworth territory before a larger assault. Seraphina, when asked for guidance, suggested only that the sick be moved somewhere out of sight until the matter could be handled without embarrassing the upcoming alliance ceremony. Her solution was silence, not answers. Wren, who spent more hours in the Omega quarters than almost anyone else in the pack, noticed something the healers had missed. Every wolf who had fallen ill drank water carried from the eastern well, a source near the far edge of pack territory that had been sealed off decades earlier by Draven's own father, though no one remembered exactly why. The well had been reopened quietly the previous year when the pack's population grew and the older wells could no longer meet demand. Wren had helped carry buckets from it herself more than once. She did not go to the king. She did not think, even for a moment, that her word would carry weight with him after everything that had happened. Instead, she went to the well herself one night, carrying only a lantern and a glass jar, and studied the water closely. It looked clear, almost too clear, with a faint metallic smell she had never noticed before. She collected a sample and brought it, not to Draven, but to the eldest healer in the pack, a stooped, half-blind wolf named Old Maren, who had mostly retired from active duty, but still remembered things the younger healers had never learned. Old Maren tested the water using methods so old, most wolves in the pack no longer knew they existed. What she found confirmed Wren's fear. A vein of corrupted silver ore ran beneath the eastern well, slowly leaching into the water table. Silver was deadly to wolves in large amounts, but even in small, steady doses, it could poison a body over time, especially the weaker bodies of Omegas and pups who had less strength to fight it off. Draven's father had sealed the well generations ago because an old pack record, buried and forgotten, had warned of exactly this danger. Armed with Old Maren's findings, Wren did something she never imagined she would do. She requested to speak before the Pack Council, the same council that had watched Draven reject her without a single objection. Several members laughed when the request reached them. A servant girl, demanding an audience on a matter of pack safety, seemed almost absurd. But Old Maren stood beside her, lending the weight of her long years of service, and the council reluctantly agreed to listen. Wren stood in the same hall where she had been rejected months earlier. This time, instead of holding a water pitcher, she held a glass jar of poisoned well water and a stack of notes she and Old Maren had prepared together. Her voice shook at first, but she did not stop. She explained the pattern of illness, the shared source of water, the buried warning from decades past, and the simple, life-saving solution of sealing the well again and finding another source. She did not mention the rejection. She did not ask for sympathy. She asked only that the council act quickly, because every day of delay meant more sick pups and Omegas. Draven had entered the hall partway through her speech, drawn by word of the unusual council session. He said nothing as he listened, watching the girl he had publicly cast aside speak with more clarity and courage than most seasoned warriors managed in front of the council. When she finished, the hall was quiet again, but this silence felt different from the one on the night of the rejection. This silence held respect. The council ordered the well sealed within the hour. Healers began treating the sick with remedies. Old Maren remembered from her early training, remedies designed to draw silver toxins out of the body slowly and safely. Within days, the feverish pups began to steady. Within 2 weeks, the worst of the illness had passed, and not a single wolf had died, though several had come close. The pack did not forget who had found the answer. Word spread quickly through the Omega quarters, and then through the wider pack that it was Wren, not the healers, not the council, and certainly not Seraphina, who had uncovered the poisoned well and pushed for it to be sealed before more lives were lost. Omegas who had once passed her without a glance began greeting her by name. Pups who had recovered from the illness ran to hug her legs when she walked through the quarters. For the first time since her rejection, Wren felt something other than quiet endurance. She felt seen. Draven noticed too, more than he wanted to admit. He found himself watching for her during his rounds through the packlands, noticing the way wolves who had once ignored her now sought her out for advice or comfort. He noticed the steady calm in her voice when she spoke, the same calm she had shown while addressing the council. He began to understand, slowly and uncomfortably, that his father's old rule about strength and bloodline had missed something important. Strength was not only found in confident nobles who filled a room with presence. Sometimes it was found quietly, in someone who kept showing up for people no one else bothered to notice. The alliance with the Vane Pack, however, was not finished unraveling. When word reached Seraphina's father that the Eastern Well crisis had been solved by a servant girl instead of his daughter or the pack healers under her authority, he saw it as a mark against Ashworth leadership rather than a reason for relief. Fearing the alliance might weaken his family's standing, he pushed to move the marriage date forward, arriving unannounced at Ashworth territory with a small envoy and a clear demand that the bonding ceremony take place within the month, before any more embarrassing incidents could occur. Draven, caught between political pressure and his own growing uncertainty, hesitated to give an answer. It was Ren, once again, who stepped forward when no one else would. She requested a private audience with the visiting Alpha, not as a Luna, or even as a mate, but as the wolf who had solved the crisis he was so eager to bury. In that meeting, she spoke plainly. She told him that a pack still recovering from a poisoned well and a frightened population needed stability, not a rushed wedding designed to save face. She reminded him, respectfully but firmly, that forcing an alliance built on pressure rather than trust rarely ended well for either side. The visiting Alpha left the meeting unsettled, not by threats, but by the simple honesty of a wolf, with nothing to gain from lying to him. Within days, he quietly withdrew his demand for a rushed ceremony, citing a need for further preparation. Seraphina, sensing the shifting mood of both her father and the Ashworth pack, grew colder and more distant, eventually requesting to return home entirely, unwilling to remain in a position where she was so clearly no longer the center of attention. With the pressure of the alliance marriage lifted, Draven finally allowed himself to face what he had been avoiding since the night of the rejection. He sought Ren out one evening near the Eastern Well, now sealed and marked with a simple stone warning for future generations. She was kneeling beside the marker, tending a small patch of flowers she had planted there, in memory of the pups who had fallen ill. He did not offer excuses when he spoke to her. He told her plainly that he had wanted a Luna who looked strong from the outside, and in doing so, he had rejected the one the moon goddess had actually given him, a woman whose strength showed itself in patience, honesty, and quiet care for wolves nobody else bothered to notice. He told her he understood if she could not forgive the humiliation he had caused her in front of the entire pack. Ren listened, without interrupting, the same steady calm in her expression that she carried everywhere now. When he finished, she told him that trust, once broken so publicly, could not simply be repaired with private words spoken beside a well. If he meant what he said, the pack that had witnessed her rejection deserved to witness whatever came next as well. Draven understood. At the next full gathering of the pack, before the same council, the same wolves, and many of the same allied alphas who had watched him cast her aside months earlier, Draven Ashworth stood before Ren Calloway and spoke without hesitation. He acknowledged his mistake openly. He praised the courage and wisdom that had saved the pack from the well crisis, and he asked her, not because the mate bond demanded it, but because the pack itself had already chosen her through their trust and gratitude, to stand beside him as Luna. The hall that had once gone silent with shock now grew warm with something closer to celebration. Omegas, who owed her their health, pups who owed her their lives, and elders, who had watched her quiet dedication for months, all voiced their support without hesitation. Ren looked out at the faces that had once overlooked her and finally allowed herself to believe that this moment was real. She accepted, not as the perfect, polished Luna the council had once imagined for their king, but as the Luna the pack actually needed, one who understood what it meant to be unseen and had chosen kindness anyway. Under a clear night sky, with the moon rising steady and full above the territory she had quietly protected, the pack that had almost lost everything to a poisoned well found, in the very mate once rejected, its greatest hope for the future.